on this Friday night, securing and strengthening Canadian sovereignty. The new Prime Minister's summit with the premiers to drum up strategies.
When I say they should be a state,
it will never happen.
Hudson's Bay's drastic downsizing.
This is a sad day, in my view, for HBC.
How many stores will stay open and the uncertainty hovering over them. Major turbulence, the power outage at Europe's busiest airport, the temporary shutdown, and questions about backup systems. Plus, international boundary issues, why Canadian access is now limited to this cross-border library.
Global National, reporting tonight, Nitu Garcha.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. As we head into the weekend and an expected federal election call, Canadians are not only considering domestic issues, but also the threats coming from U.S. President Donald Trump. Today in Washington, Trump again challenged Canadian sovereignty, reiterating his belief Canada should become a state. He also reminded everyone of his wide-ranging reciprocal tariffs set to kick in on April 2nd, right in the middle of our country's federal election campaign.
and remember with Canada, we don't need their cars, we don't need their lumber, we don't need their energy, we don't need anything from Canada, and yet it costs us $200 billion a year in subsidy to keep Canada afloat.
None of that is true, though. Canadian steel is a critical part of the U.S. automotive industry. America also relies heavily on other Canadian resources, and there's no such thing as a $200 billion U.S. subsidy. As leaders here try to filter through the noise, they can't ignore the threats. And today, Canada's response was the focus of a pivotal meeting in Ottawa between Prime Minister Mark Carney and the premiers. David Akin is following those discussions there for us tonight. David?
Well, Nitu, that meeting has concluded between the Prime Minister and the premiers, and it was here at the Canadian War Museum where they gathered to really assess next steps in how to better protect the country from an aggressive, expansionist United States president.
So when I say they should be a state, I mean that. I really mean that, because we can't be expected to carry a country that is right next to us on our border.
The people gathering in this room, surrounded by reminders of how Canadians fought to defend democracy around the world, take Donald Trump's musings as a serious threat.
To have Team Canada get together at the War Museum while we're facing a trade war on two fronts, with America, with the People's Republic of China, I think it's an important clarifying moment for Canadians of all walks of life.
It will never happen that Canada or Quebec become a 51st state.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is focused on boosting interprovincial trade.
We can give ourselves, as Canadians, much more than anyone else can take away. And we can do that by working together.
He announced his government would move rapidly to speed up approvals for big projects and make more federal money available for roads and ports.
One project, one review. It's time to build.
Maritime premiers are establishing an Atlantic free trade zone. Doug Ford in Ontario, just re-elected, says the first piece of legislation his government introduces will target the same thing. And Ottawa is also promising to reduce trade barriers.
So we're combing through all federal legislation for those barriers. We intend, from a federal level, to have free trade by Canada Day.
Alberta Premier Danielle Smith says the best way to protect Canada's economy is to build oil and gas pipelines to Canada's east coast. But Quebec has long objected to any pipeline over its territory. But the Trump threat might be changing that.
Since the beginning, what we say is we have to have a social acceptance from Quebec population. But I see right now with what Donald Trump is saying that there's a move. The opinion is changing right now.
And so the premiers are heading back to provincial capitals, ready to start taking down those trade barriers. Mark Carney will be on a campaign trail. And in the meantime, the government of Canada has launched an ad campaign in the United States with digital ads at point-of-sale terminals. And the message to Americans is, if you're noticing the price of gas or groceries go up, blame Trump's tariffs. Neithu.
All right, David Akin in Ottawa tonight. Thanks, David. And Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly is directly addressing Americans as well. Appearing on CNN today, Joly essentially asked Americans to walk in our shoes.
Imagine the case of another country saying that they don't recognize the borders of the U.S., that they're threatening the sovereignty of American territory. How would Americans react? They would say, no way, it's unacceptable. Well, that's exactly how Canadians are reacting right now.
Leaders in Canada's energy sector have put forward their plan to strengthen Canadian economic sovereignty, issuing an open letter to federal party leaders asking for changes to industry regulations. As Adam MacVicar reports, it's already set to be a hot political issue for the coming election.
Build Canada Now, the unified message from boardrooms in Canada's energy capital on the eve of an election call and an ongoing trade dispute with the United States.
Canadians need to recognize that our sovereignty has been threatened. We are all interested in prosperity, and Canadian energy can significantly contribute to that.
14 CEOs from Canada's biggest energy producers and pipeline builders are calling on Ottawa to declare an energy crisis and use emergency powers to speed up key projects.
We need some streamlined approval processes. We need some practical climate policy.
The letter, sent to the leaders of the Liberals, Conservatives, NDP and Bloc, calls for simplified regulations, 6-month deadlines for project approvals, and the elimination of the federal emissions cap and carbon levy on heavy emitters, policies Alberta's premier has long condemned.
It makes it difficult for any linear project to get approved. The tanker ban on the West Coast makes it impossible to build a pipeline to British Columbia.
After meeting with Danielle Smith, the Prime Minister pledged to build economic corridors and increase the competitiveness of Canada's energy industry by reaching new markets besides the U.S.
The commitment is to deliver those projects like those that we agree that are national priorities.
His main political rival isn't buying it.
He suddenly, 30 days before an election, changed his entire radical net zero, keep it in the ground ideology.
But experts warn against sidestepping checks and balances.
Our democratic institutions are robust and should and can be expected to move more quickly. I'm not convinced, and I don't think the case has been made, that we need to short circuit all of that.
Adam MacVicar, Global News, Calgary.
On Sunday, we'll find out the exact date of the federal election, but Canadians from coast to coast to coast likely have a little over a month to consider their choices and decide who they want as Prime Minister. Tonight, Heidi Petracek looks at the appetite for a vote and the issues that matter most.
At this barbershop, there's one thing that's got everyone buzzing.
Tariffs. Tariffs is the biggest word that we hear a lot of. We're sick of hearing it, actually.
Canadian politics will soon get swept into the chatter, too, along with the ballot box issues hitting closest to home.
The economy, yeah, for sure, like taxes.
A sentiment echoed on the streets.
I think I'd be a little bit worried about the economy and certainly what's going on in the States, which I guess might go hand in hand.
The government need to come up with a way to handle that, like to handle all the decisions that Trump is making.
An Ipsos poll for Global News asked Canadians about the most crucial issues facing the country. Most, 23%, ranked inflation and cost of living at the top, followed by concerns over relations with other countries, reflecting the times of Trump, at 15%. Healthcare at 14%.
Right now, I'm a little undecided.
And it's undecided voters like Marianne Carew all parties are hoping to court.
We're in a situation where we need to have some new leadership in the country, especially at these times, and have a big voice.
For some, change is already in the air.
To be honest, I need to do a bit more research, but I think it's time for a change, I'd say.
It's about time. Yeah, I wanted to vote a long time ago to get this government out.
And it seems everyone can agree on the need for clarity to counter what's quickly become an existential threat.
We need a government with a mandate to be able to move forward, both things within the country as well as dealing with things internationally, and especially with President Trump.
Signaling that perhaps national unity will override political divisions of the recent past.
You know, I don't think many people are happy with the state of the economy, with healthcare, with the affordability crisis.
Potential voters telling us they're ready to go to the polls whenever the election date is called. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Halifax.
Hudson's Bay is going ahead with plans to start liquidating all but 6 of its department stores. An Ontario court has given the retailer permission to sell off its inventory. Sean O'Shea was in court and reports on the decision and what happens next.
In an 8th-floor courtroom in downtown Toronto, a company with more than 350 years of Canadian retail history faced the end of the line.
This is a sad day, in my view, for HBC, which is a Canadian icon, and a sad day ultimately for the employees.
It's an iconic department store. It's gone. Hopefully it's coming back.
But coming back doesn't sound very possible anymore. An Ontario Superior Court judge granted what the Bay and creditors asked for, liquidation. More than 80 stores across the country, but not all. For now, the flagship store in downtown Toronto will remain, another at Yorkdale Mall, one of the busiest retail hubs in Canada, and a third in Richmond Hill, north of Toronto, and 3 more stores in and around Montreal. Every store west of Ontario and east of Quebec destined to close.
I do not see its Hudson's Bay Company celebrating its 355th birthday coming up on May 2nd.
How this turns out is a big unknown for the 6 stores.
The court heard the company hasn't been able to find new investors. It's reported to owe about $1 billion to creditors. The liquidation, bad news for Hudson's Bay employees.
Given the population of 9,400 employees, mass termination ultimately will lead to severance claims in excess, probably well in excess of $100 million.
For shoppers,
I am from India. So whosoever comes in Toronto, everyone wants to go to the Hudson Bay only because we find so much good variety over like all brands.
It's nice to keep the flagship, but it's not going to be the same. This is an iconic, the country was founded on this, and it's going to be hard to see it go.
So liquidation of the Bay stores on Monday, except for those 6 stores. And the court heard there's no guarantee that those 6 stores will be able to hang on for very long or whether anyone will come forward with any money. As for consumers who hold gift cards of the Bay, those will be valid until April the 6th. Neetu.
All right, thanks, Sean. Overseas, Europe's busiest airport, London Heathrow, is slowly reopening tonight following a shutdown that lasted most of the day. A huge fireball lit up the sky near Heathrow overnight. An electrical substation that feeds the airport caught fire, prompting the aviation hub to shut down. More than 1,000 flights were canceled or diverted, affecting more than 200,000 passengers. Among the cancellations, at least 16 Air Canada flights and 2 from WestJet. Redmond Shannon reports from London.
Normally one of the world's busiest airports, on Friday London Heathrow's skies were empty and its terminals without power. The optimistic passengers who did turn up to the closed airport were told to go home.
I can't get to the actual airport. The roads are all closed. We've been to both entrances.
The disruption felt by tens of thousands of travellers around the world, flying to or through Heathrow. Aircraft en route from Canada had to divert to other airports or turn back, like this Air Canada flight from Vancouver.
So we got just north of Winnipeg, and then the captain came on and said, oh yeah, we're going straight back. So I've got to go and find a bed somewhere and then come back tomorrow at 1 o'clock.
The power outage chaos caused by this huge fire at an electrical substation serving Heathrow.
The fire involved a transformer comprising of 25,000 litres of cooling oil fully alight. This created a major hazard.
A counter-terror unit is leading the investigation, but police say there are so far no indications of sabotage. Many of those affected are asking just how the power could go out at Europe's busiest airport without a fully functional and adequate backup system in place.
Short of anybody getting hurt, this is as big as it gets for our airport.
The airport boss said its power backups are only designed to protect critical systems.
Our backup systems have worked the way they should, our crisis management has worked the way it should, but this just takes time when we have an incident of this major severity.
The first plane landed again 19 hours after the fire. It is expected to be days before the backlog of disruption is cleared. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Conflict of interest concerns. Coming up, why critics have problems with Elon Musk's visit to the Pentagon. Elon Musk was at the Pentagon today, a visit first reported to be for a briefing about any potential future conflict between the U.S. and China. But President Trump and his defense secretary, Pete Hegseth, insist it was about the Department of Government Efficiency. As Jackson Prosco reports, it's fueling questions about the billionaire's access to sensitive files and vast conflicts of interest.
Elon Musk's grip on Washington brought him to the Pentagon for a visit shrouded in controversy.
The New York Times reported Musk was there for a briefing on classified U.S. military plans for any war that might break out with China, potentially offering the billionaire a glimpse of some of the nation's most closely guarded military secrets.
But this was a made-up story by the New York Times. I call it the failing. It's a failing newspaper.
Denial came swiftly from the White House as President Donald Trump appeared with his defense secretary soon after.
Elon was over there today to address costs. Doge, thing called Doge, which you've heard about.
There was no war plans. There was no Chinese war plans. There was no secret plans. That's not what we were doing at the Pentagon.
Mr. Musk, how was the meeting? Mr. Mark, how was the meeting?
Whatever the meeting was about, it highlights the double role Musk plays. The Defense Department, with its more than $800 billion budget, is a huge opportunity for the government efficiencies he has promised to find. It also represents potential conflicts of interest. Musk makes billions with Pentagon contracts, and his Tesla cars rely heavily on China, which accounts for half its customer base. Musk rarely criticizes Beijing.
If you're rich and you say, I'm interested, people tend to say, yes, we'd love to talk to you. It could be because he's interested and he wants to see profit opportunities. It's an obvious conflict of interest.
Clearly, it's a sensitive subject. So much so, Trump insisted Musk wouldn't want to know the China war plan anyway.
I think he wouldn't do it. He wouldn't want to put himself in that position.
Little comfort to critics of both men, who note the world's richest man has faced few obstacles in getting whatever he wants. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
In Ukraine, Russian drones pounded the port city of Odessa today, sparking major fires and power outages in 3 separate locations. At least 3 people were injured. Russia pursued the aerial attacks despite agreeing to temporarily pause strikes on energy infrastructure. The U.S., which is deeply involved in ceasefire negotiations, spoke to both countries earlier this week. A miraculous story of survival. Ahead, a baby girl pulled from the rubble after airstrikes resume in Gaza. Sudan's military celebrated in Khartoum as they reclaimed the country's presidential palace in a now 2-year-long civil war. It's a major victory against the RSF paramilitary that took Sudan's capital early on in the conflict and is now being pushed out. Both sides are still fighting over territory throughout much of the country. It's estimated more than 150,000 Sudanese people have died and millions have been displaced. In the devastation of a shattered ceasefire in Gaza, there is a remarkable story of survival. In Han Yunis, a 25-day-old girl was pulled from the rubble after an Israeli airstrike, her cries heard beneath the debris. Her parents and brother were killed in the attack. Baby Ella and her grandparents, the sole surviving family members.
This all comes against a backdrop of no supplies having entered Gaza since the beginning of March, so for about 19 days. So this is the longest period since the start of the conflict back in October 2023, when no supplies whatsoever have entered Gaza.
The UN estimates the entire population of Gaza, more than 2 million people, urgently need assistance. The occupied West Bank is also facing escalating violence and displacement. In response, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly has announced more than $99 million in funding to support humanitarian efforts. Next, a hard line on a symbol of harmony, why the U.S. is blocking Canadian access to this border-straddling library. A long-standing cross-border relationship is on the line tonight. Border tensions could cost a Quebec community access to its historic library. The Haskell Free Library and Opera House straddles the Canada-U.S. border. It serves the towns of Stansted, Quebec, and Derby Line, Vermont. But now, as Mike Armstrong reports, the U.S. government is telling Canadians they can't visit the way they have for more than a century.
For about as long as anyone remembers, this is how it's worked. Canadians can cross the border to get to the library, but they're not allowed to step off the sidewalk. Always watched by cameras and U.S. Border Patrol.
A little bit of anger, deception.
Well, Sylvie Boudreau, the head of the library's board, was called to a meeting Tuesday with the Border Patrol. She says officials have for years wanted to stop Canadians from crossing, and with Donald Trump in the White House, are finally doing it.
They say that now with the new administration, they agree with them.
Okay, we're renewing this one?
Yes. The building opened in 1904, literally straddling the border. It was meant to be a symbol of friendship shared between the communities. In addition to the library down below, the building also has this opera house, a pretty unique one, where the people on stage are in one country, Canada, and the people in the audience are in the US. Well, about half of them, the line's right here. Now, without access to both parts of the building from the sidewalk, the Border Patrol says Canadians will have to enter from the Canadian entrance. The problem is there is no Canadian entrance. There's just an emergency exit on the Canadian side. I'll show you the way. A lot of renovations are going to be needed, and the problem is it comes out just in the back of the library, which means staff can't watch who's coming and going. To make changes, the library is looking at a big price tag.
I evaluate that at over $100,000. Plus, we're going to have to hire more staff.
I want to start by saying that we love our neighbors.
The move by the Border Patrol isn't going over well with either community. While Canadian officials held a press conference on one side of the border Friday afternoon, Americans turned out on the other.
It's just like one more step in building this chasm between our nations.
What the United States is doing is inappropriate and wrong. And as a United States citizen, I protest that.
Now, no one seems to think the U.S. Border Patrol's decision is reversible. They're going to have to live with it. They just want the people who made the decision to know no one's happy about it. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Stansted, Quebec.
And that is Global National for this Friday night. Tonight's Your Canada showcases this outdoor mural in Richmond, BC, a patriotic home in Edmonton, and Niagara Falls lit up in red and white. Thanks so much for watching, and have a great night.